Welcome back to Hope Unabridged. I'm Angie Elkins.
And I'm Casey Brennan.
We've got a great show for you today. We are hosting Savannah Locke. She is a writer, and she was just recently part of a project about women in the Bible. And I'm so excited to talk to her today. You know, we talk about these women in the Bible like they're some kind of
Storybook.
Imaginary character, right? Like I can remember growing up with a felt board and putting, felt figures of Mary Magdalene on a felt board. So today we're going to get to talk to her about how we're connected to these women. It's so cool.
Women that have real issues.
Yeah, just like us.
Right. I'm excited.
Savannah is a graduate student getting her Master's of Theology in Anabaptist Studies. She's also a singer-songwriter and has written for artists like Sixpence None the Richer. It's so cool. She is also currently working on her first book, so we're excited about that for her. And today she's going to be sharing how she is a dog mom, 2 dogs now, Prudence and Bentley. So we're excited to talk to Savannah today. Savannah, welcome to Hope Unabridged.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we have so much we want to talk to you about. Casey and I have just discovered you, and we are totally big fans already. So we're thrilled to introduce you to our audience. I know that you are part of a project called Faithful with a lot of other women, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before we do, would you just tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yes. So I live here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a writer, which is what I did for the Faithful Project. And I'm also a songwriter, which I also did for the Faithful Project and sang because there's a record in a book. I'm a graduate student, so I'm about to finish up my second year in grad school, getting my master's in theology. And I'm married to an amazing person named Todd, and we have 2 puppies named Prudence and Bentley. That's pretty much my life.
I love those names. They're so cute.
So cute. And your dogs are adorable. I saw them on your Instagram feed. So
yeah, they're adorable when they're still. That's it.
I can imagine that's a lot to have 2 puppies at one time. It's kind of like twins, maybe.
Yes, exactly. I would say I've learned the hard way, or the good way, actually. My siblings, anytime I try to compare me having dogs to them having kids, they're like, no comparison.
Nope.
So I'm just a dog mom.
And listen, dog mom's good training for real mom, like people
It's true.
mom.
It's true.
Yeah, I think so.
All the patience.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love it.
So you got to be part of a project called Faithful, and the list of women involved in this project is absolutely impressive and super cool. So first tell us about the project, but also we want to know how you got to be in the room where it happens, because
that sounds like an amazing experience.
Absolutely. Like just sitting in a room with those women and thinking about the women of the Bible. So tell us about Faithful.
Yes. So Faithful is a project that a woman named Keely Scott came up with. She works for Compassion International. And so she kind of had this dream of creating this collaborative community of women who would write a book together and a record together and then do this live stream performance. Of course, before COVID, we were thinking about like tours and stuff like that, but we sort of had to pivot because of that. But the goal for this project was to essentially highlight different women's stories in the Bible that oftentimes are passed by. And that was what we made a mission out of. And so we had 3 writing retreats before COVID happened last year, where 20 different women got together for each one. And we had songwriting parts of it, and we had regular writing parts of it. And that's sort of how everything started propagating.
Wow, that's amazing. Impressive. Okay, tell us about how you got involved in the project.
My gosh.
I bet that was amazing.
It was just so ridiculous. So someone basically dropped out of one of the last camps, and that they had one of the last retreats. And I, at the time, was managing a doctor's office. So I had done a lot of songwriting stuff in college. I had a record stuff that I did. And I also had this blog that I was doing in my social media. And because of that, I knew a ton of different people in Nashville that were involved in this industry. So whenever this person, whoever this was, dropped out of that 3rd writing camp, I guess they had a meeting and they were like, hey, who can we bring on last minute? And I got a call from Andy Osinga, who was the contact at Integrity Music. And he was like, hey, he said your name came up. A lot of people love your Instagram. Would you want to join? And I was like, sure. Because I had met him when I was 18 years old. when he was
Wow.
working with a record called Capitol, and we had worked together to do music at Capitol. So basically, it was just this really cool experience, where I
Yeah.
got looped in.
That's so cool.
That is so cool.
So
I
the
love that.
focus of Faithful, as we said, is the women of the Bible. So tell us a little bit about what it was like to just sit around with a group of modern women and study these ancient women characters that have meant so much to us over the years. And maybe something that just stood out to you that was just unexpected or different.
Well, I know we were joking about the dog mom thing, but because I am not a mom to children, I think a lot of stories or I'll say it this way. A lot of moms think along the lines of generations. So, and parents in general think along the lines of generations, where you're already thinking like with prophetically, really, like with forethought of like what the message that you're carrying is the message that you're going to give to another generation. And something that I learned by being a part of this collaborative community of women, a lot of whom are older women and have raised kids, honestly, that are my age, that they just have this like lineage that they're so connected to that I don't think I was connected to in the same way until I was involved in this project. Where, you're talking about ancient women and modern women. But what this project has helped me realize is that actually it's like ancient women, but like this lineage that has led to us modern women.
Wow.
And now we are part of something that then's going to carry forth into younger generations. So I think for me, a huge standout was just realizing like, even though I'm not a mom, I actually carry this message that is going to be passed to another generation. So I'm part of this unfolding story that's been happening from Eve to Rahab to Esther to Mary Magdalene to us,
Yeah.
I love that. And your chapter is on Mary Magdalene, correct?
Yes, it is.
Oh, my favorite. Can you talk a
Is
little
she
bit
your
about
favorite?
Yes.
Yeah, I love her too.
Love her. Can you talk a little bit about what was that like, just kind of sitting in that space and writing about her?
I was always drawn to her story in John 20, which if you guys love Mary Magdalene, then you know that, where after Jesus had resurrected, Mary just lingered there. And when she saw the grave clothes in the tomb, but then saw Jesus as the gardener and just this massive tension that she was experiencing. And I so relate to that. I don't know if you guys do too.
I totally do.
Like, you're looking in this grave and you're like, he's 100% dead. But then you're looking at this gardener and then you hear him say your name and you're like, no, that's Jesus. And just holding these like two contradictory realities. It's just the life of faith is what that is. And so I've always loved that story. And I've loved that she lingered and that she stayed and everyone else was like gone. And I also love that Jesus commissioned her to be the first person to talk about the
first
resurrected
evangelist.
Christ. Yes, which I love.
Me too.
Yeah, so I love all of that.
Yeah, I love what you said. And it is kind of like a holding of grief and hope and the same. And that's such a core message of my heart. And maybe that's why I relate to her so much. But
yeah,
I love that. Oh,
I love that grief. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me a little bit about your story and how, because I've, looked at your work on Instagram and you were such an amazing writer, by the way. And I really hope that you write a book because it would be amazing. Yeah. But I would love to know, yay. Well, I would love to know your story and just where that vulnerability comes from.
Well, do you guys talk about the Enneagram on here?
I'm an Enneagram coach. Yes.
Okay. So I'm a 4.
Okay.
Built into my wiring is just this huge desire for authenticity. And so I've always sort of been that way, that I've struggled with performing and acting one way when I actually feel a different way. But just a little bit about my story. I grew up in church culture. So my grandparents were pastors. My mom was a worship leader. And with that comes a lot, especially 25 years ago, with that comes a lot of performance where you kind of have to have things together because your grandparents are the pastors of the church. And all of these people are looking to your family to be this model family and these examples for Christ. So that was sort of the message that was ingrained in me was, if you have struggles, that's fine, but put them in the back burner and you lead with your best self and you put on your Sunday best every day in order to like reflect the glory of God. So that changed for me though, as I grew up and started dealing with a lot of like childhood trauma that was popping up and started going to therapy. And I realized, no, actually, when you lead with your wounds, that's where the glory of God shines the most. And I think about when Jesus came to Thomas, when Thomas was like, I'm not going to believe it till I see it. And Jesus was like, okay, like here, like look at these, feel the scars and feel the wounds. And that even in Jesus's resurrected personhood, that there are still wounds and scars there. And that's the message of even resurrection and even hope, is that, this grief is still mingled into that. And that's what we can lead with. So for me, in terms of like vulnerability and authenticity, I used to see it as this like hurdle to being like a leader or influential or whatever. But now it's like, no, that's actually the superpower that people crave the most.
I love that. And that just shows a lot of growth too, that you've done. Like it really does. And I'm a 7. So I'm like, hide the pain. And I was just talking with Angie before this where, I just envy that vulnerability. I wish that I had the guts to be more vulnerable. And I'm like trying to get to that place because I get in my head about it, and it's like, oh, people are going to see my pain. People are going to see my struggles. And you just offer that so freely, and it's just a beautiful thing.
It is.
Thank you.
I think that is such a good lesson for us to learn. And, somebody's watching right now, I know, that needs to hear this because it's so much easier to try to look perfect and have it all together. But I think when we're willing to say, I'm not perfect, and let me just let you in, it connects us so much more to people around us and just allows us to do ministry. And that's what I noticed on your Instagram feed, which we keep talking about. So everyone go follow Savannah on Instagram.
You guys are funny.
But it was just so good. Just the way that you are super vulnerable and talk about I loved the post that you did about, it's a picture of you in your wedding dress. And you talked about a memory from an old boyfriend who didn't want you to sit by him in church. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just like putting you away.
Yeah. So that actually does, tie in really well with this conversation, which I probably wouldn't have made that connection. So it's beautiful. But we just celebrated our 5th anniversary a couple of weeks ago. And my husband for our anniversary was like, let's go to dinner and make a huge thing of it. And like, he's very like, he cherishes me very, very well. And it was sort of confronting to me for some reason on our 5th anniversary. It was like, it's been 5 years and you're still like, just so like dead set on like celebrating and cherishing like me and our relationship. And when that happened on our anniversary, I had this flashback to a guy that I had dated who was like a worship pastor at a church. And he didn't want anyone in the church to know that we were dating because he didn't want like the gossip mill to start going or whatever. Yeah. And so he made me sit like in the back row of our church while he led worship, and we would meet in the parking lot after he was done. And the way he would frame it would be like, hey, like, I just don't want anyone to be like, it's not their business. I don't want them to talk about our relationship. But the truth is that what the message I heard was like, I don't want to be seen with you and I want you to be hidden. And so for me, like just the healing that has come to be with someone who reflects the heart of God towards me and towards everyone, which is like, it reminds me of an Amanda Cook song where she says, your love is proud to be seen with me, where like God actually celebrates and cherishes being seen with us and wants to show us. And so all of that to say, that was the connection that was made for me. And
that's so beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, just taking a hard turn here, about the songs that you've been writing for Faithful, and then also I love all of the songs that you've written. So I just like I said, we just discovered you, and I went on this like you're on all my Spotify's now. Like, love that
research train.
Yes, but talk about the ones that you specifically wrote for Faithful.
Well, so I sang on. Do you know the song, The Detour? I don't know if you guys have been able to.
So good.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's this song called The Detour that was just the most beautiful thing about how God takes the scenic route. And I just love that idea that like the detour is the road is like the primary, it's like the top line from the song. And so like that message has been so meaningful. And I'd love to hear from you guys too. But like so many times we think when we're growing up, like, oh, life moves from A to B to C and then you're done.
Yeah.
But then like what this song talks about is actually like, you're going to start at A and then go backwards. And then you're going to like go left and right. And then all of a sudden you're going to end up in this place that you never even knew you were headed. And that's the whole road. Like that's the point of things. And so I think that message is so like beautiful and healing. And I wish that everyone, especially like college age students and like into your early 20s, that everyone knew this life is not going to happen in a linear fashion.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I'm also a documentary producer, and years ago we were in Africa. We were shooting this film, and it just reminded me of this story. And we had a very like strict schedule. It was like go from A to B, but it's a very strict schedule. And I was the producer, so I'm like, we have to stay on schedule. And one of the guys that was kind of our handler while we were there was like, but I want you to come and see this handball team, because this handball team is really wonderful, and these women, and it's about 2 hours away. No big deal. We'll be in and out. And I'm like, this isn't the schedule. We got to stick to the schedule. Anyway, we ended up going. And so it took all day long. There was like tons of traffic, and I'm stressing the entire time. But we get there, and it's this beautiful, like in the middle of nowhere, Africa, and this like 2-story hut. And we go to the top of the hut, and this handball team reminded me of just like the teammanship and all these women, of like, I played soccer in college, and just like that companionship that you have.
Yes.
And we sat on top of this hut, and we looked over all of, what we could see of Africa. And they were like, let's sing I Love You, Lord. And they sang I Love You, Lord in French African. And I just lost it. It was just tears streaming down my face. And I was like, this is the most beautiful experience, that I almost missed this.
Yeah.
So those kinds of stories where it's like, hey, I'm going to take you over here for a minute because you need to learn something over here. It's not your plan, and it's not like we're going off course, but be prepared to just be open to that. And that taught me that lesson at a very early age. And it was just such a beautiful thing.
That's so stunning. Thank you for sharing that story. Wow. It's so true. And like the idea of like you could have missed it.
Yeah.
If you had gotten more like rigid. And I think that that's like so much of like what life teaches you as you go on. If you like embrace it, is like the more pliable, the better, because then you're going to be able to pick up on like these like threads of grace that God puts in your way.
Yes.
So I love that. That's so beautiful.
I think, as you were talking, Casey, about that, and we were talking about the detour, I couldn't help but think of what we've all been through the last year with COVID and how it definitely feels like a detour. Everything got put on hold. But I'd love to know kind of what it's been like for you. And as you've walked through the total unexpected last year and a half, how have you dealt? What has God showed you? Has he done anything surprising?
A ton of surprising stuff. Yeah. So I had just started my own real estate media company right when COVID started. So I had been managing a doctor's office for 3 years and knew that I wanted to start my own business, and basically started this thing. And it was crazy because real estate, like nobody was touring houses. Right. So everyone was putting such a premium on real estate media. So I had a really, really, really busy year. And then at the beginning of this year, I was feeling really burned out because COVID brought rest for so many people and also trauma for so many people. And like a lot of people were able to kind of have more space than normal, but that just wasn't really the case for me. Like it was a lot of work because my business was just growing and growing. And at the beginning of this year, I was feeling really burned out, and I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I've done this, I've built this. And so I like on June 1st, so in 5 weeks, I will have sold and finished my business. So in 1 year during COVID, it has literally been like starting this new thing, like working really hard, realizing I was burnt out. And I thought this was like my plan for like the next 7 years. Like I had like this whole plan set up. And so I think what has been really interesting is like, as I've embraced the message that God has been trying to speak to me through this like terrible trauma that has happened, to us globally, it's realized like that I actually need to embrace my limitations a little bit more, which as a 7, you might actually be like, that might be a prevailing message for you too.
Yeah.
Where it's like, for me, I'm like, I can do this. Nothing affects me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep working harder. And I think for me, what COVID has taught me is like, actually, I need to like pare some stuff down and focus on what I'm really like passionate about. My word for the year is conviction. Like I'm going to do things with conviction. And just because I can do something doesn't mean that I should.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what I've taken away from this year.
Oh, that's really good. And that shows a lot of obedience too. I mean, I can't imagine like starting something, being really excited about it, and then just, I'm going to sell it down, move on to something else. I mean, you're listening and you're pausing and you're taking that time to pivot when God says pivot. So I think that's beautiful.
I want to ask you, I want to ask you a little bit more about the women of the Bible too, because I just keep going back to what you said about the connection from the ancient women to us. And I'm thinking about you as a modern woman, starting a business, selling the business, all of that. But I would love to know kind of what did you learn about some of the women of the Bible? We've already mentioned Mary Magdalene, but who are some others that really stood out to you?
So from the Faithful Project specifically, a couple of things stand out. So the first one was, there's a song on the record called Rahab's Lullaby. And there's also a chapter about Rahab, because what was really focused on through this like writing camps and the chapters was like Rahab being Boaz's mom. And like when I think of Rahab and just kind of what I was taught, it was very like Rahab the prostitute.
Right.
And she like hid these men when they were, you know, in the thing, God saved them, etc. But like seeing Rahab as a woman who raised this like incredible man of integrity and like just realizing that people have fuller stories than these little like snippets that we've been given, and just imagining what those stories might have been like has been really humanizing for these ancient women. Like for me, instead of thinking of Esther as like Queen Esther, but like also thinking like, oh, like she didn't have like parents, and like, and just like the grief that would come with that. And then like Mordecai's role in her life, and even just bringing in some like modern psychology pieces to that of like the power of like reparenting and like this like stabilizing presence. And also the idea that Esther, like a lot of people theorize that Esther might have been an abuse victim, which is really interesting too, because that's part of my story. So just kind of trying to draw these threads of connection between us and these people that have kind of become felt characters on some sort of board in like the children's room. So it's been really powerful to have those.
I love that you went there, because I think that there is there's so much trauma that we don't talk about that happened in the Bible. I mean, like a lot. And we kind of focus on those top level stories and just like the beauty that came out of them, but we don't focus on like they were people and they went through this. Like they went through that. That's a big thing. And it does humanize it a little bit, and it makes it relatable.
100%. Yes. And I love that you said that too. Like they were people. Like it just sounds so silly because it's so simple, but they were human beings, and like just like us, and they got hurt and got in fights and had arguments. And like, there are so many like humanizing elements that we can sometimes, not just with them, but we honestly do this with like celebrities now, where it's just like, we do dehumanize them and keep a distance, when the truth is that we're all made of the same material. So,
Can you give us a little more context for women of the Bible? Specifically, maybe let's talk about Mary Magdalene. What do we know about her, and what was kind of her context and her culture, and how were women treated back in the day? And contrast that with how Jesus treated her.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, there are kind of like varying theories about this too, that at least I've learned in my schooling, that have been kind of surprising, where in some ways, like women were treated as less than, like where their word couldn't even be held up in the court of law. So like that is like obviously negative patriarchal system. But there were other ways where actually women could like own their own businesses. And I didn't know that, where like we have Priscilla, who was iconic, like who was like fundraising and like literally giving money to Jesus and then disciples to keep their ministries going. And so I think that what we want to do is we want to say like women were treated like trash and Jesus didn't treat, and that's true.
Mhm.
But then also there's this more empowering story, which says that like, hey, even in these less than ideal circumstances, like God has been empowering women to do amazing things for the last like 4,000 years.
Yeah.
So these like beautiful stories that have happened. So that being said, like it's very nuanced. However, something that I really love is like what we talked about, Mary Magdalene being the first evangelist. I love that because it was so countercultural.
Mhm.
Like for women to be disciples, like,
Right.
and to sit and learn, and for their primary role not to be caretaking, which is beautiful, but also to be like intellectual and academic and
Yeah.
and learning in terms of like religion and tradition. I love that about Jesus, that Jesus really empowered women to do that and
Mhm.
included women in those stories. And I also love that when Jesus said, hey, like go and tell your brothers that I'm alive in John 20, that the men didn't even believe her. Like she
Yeah.
literally went and she
Right.
was like, I've seen the Lord. And they were like,
They're like,
no. And I just thought that's so relatable.
Yes.
Where it's like the story that never ends is
Right,
like
right.
women being like, hey, I like noticed this thing. And a lot of times like a lot of the response can be like, no, that's not
Yeah.
true. And they need to see it for themselves. So I actually think that there's some humor in that too, where it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, like this is just kind of the story that we're in, but also God has been continually choosing women and men to share in this story and to bring about this amazing kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
good.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk to you all day about this because it's like
Totally.
one of
Okay.
my heart
Yeah.
subjects. But we have one
Oh.
final question that we ask everyone,
Yeah.
and it's where are you finding hope these days?
Oh gosh. Oof.
It's a hard one.
Where am I finding hope these days? I've been thinking a lot about paying, like the idea of paying attention to my life. There's my favorite author. His name is Frederick Buechner.
Yes.
And do you love him?
Love
Okay.
him.
He lives in Florida. I've written him a
Oh,
letter.
that's
I love
right.
him.
Oh,
We should have him
Oh,
on.
maybe we should.
I know, for reals. So he has this book called The Remarkable Ordinary. And in it, he talks a lot about like paying attention to your life and listening to your life. And I think that for me, the opposite of hope is despair. And for me, despair comes from me moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour and not paying attention to my life. And like to your point about your story of like missing the whole entire like community and the game and the hut and all that. So often I give way to despair when I miss out on what God's doing, because I'm either too busy to see or too blinded to see. So for me, hope has been coming from paying attention to like the way that my coffee tastes and the way that my yogurt and berries taste and like the sound of the birds outside. And so for me, it's just like slowing down and like really centering in on what is here and what is here now.
Yes.
And from there, I have found that like hope kind of rises up for something.
Yeah, the noticing.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today on Hope Unabridged. We'd like to remind you, if you're watching us on Good Life 45, you can also listen to these episodes everywhere you listen to podcasts.
If you're listening and you would like to see the filmed version of this show or any of our other shows, check us out on Good Life 45 or on our YouTube channel and our app.
We hope that something you've heard today really blessed you, and we would love for you to share the show with those you love. Just hit that share button on your podcast app or on YouTube and send it to a friend. And we would also love it if you would leave us a review. With this program, we are finding hope in the unedited stories of our lives, and we want you to do the same.